Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francena Turner, and I'm a Clear Fellow and Postdoctoral Associate in Data Curation for African American History and Culture at the University of Maryland. I'm moderating this session entitled Instruction, Digital Pedagogy, Bridging the Gap Between Classroom and Library. Before I introduce each panelist, I'd like to remind attendees we'll be following the Digital Library Federation Code of Conduct, which we'll place in the chat. Audience members, if you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom app. We will turn to questions and answers at the 40-minute mark of this 50-minute session. And now I'll introduce the panel speakers by name, title, and organization. To view their full bios, please click the speakers page in the Zoom events lobby. DeLisa Minor is the Director of Library Services at Fisk University, Fisk University's John Hope and Aurelia E. Franklin Library. Anna Ndumu is an assistant professor at the University of Maryland College Park. Kayla Siddell is an associate director of the University Library at Xavier University of Louisiana. And Siobahn Grady is the assistant professor and program director of information science at North Carolina Central University. And so our panelists either work at HBCUs or research HBCU library practices. We don't expect every panelist to respond to every question, but we should have a generative discussion with the breadth and depth of experiences represented here. And so for our first question, could each panelist please discuss your work in relation to digital pedagogy and instruction?
I can start.
Okay.
So in my current role as director of the library, I work now mostly as an advocate for resources to support information and digital instruction by our librarians that's offered to faculty and staff, as well as students here at Fisk. And working on developing partnerships and collaborations that bring about more resources and information technologies for our students. In previous roles as assistant director and then a special collections librarian, I conducted instructional sessions with students centered around digital pedagogies as well as traditional information literacy.
I'll go next. So my connection to libraries is really around research. Although I am a product of the HBCU Library Alliance, I smile from ear to ear because my mentors really are the reason why I'm here. So I just want to elevate Adrian Weber and also Sandra Phoenix, because I was in the first cohort of the, what was it called? I think it was the Leadership Institute back in 2007. Yeah. So, and also through the DLF, I was able to attend the 2017 convening. And from there, I became a Futures Fellow. So I was able to conduct 5 different studies around HBCU libraries and their digital practices. So I'm very honored to be here, truly delighted to come full circle.
Thank you so much, Kayla.
Yeah, so I was also a product of the DLF HBCU Library Alliance and the Authenticity Project. So shout out to them. But my role in digital pedagogy and instruction actually changed quite a bit because of COVID. We had a lot of turnover, and we went from something like 20 staff to about 5, which was really jarring. And so one of the things we did was start to turn to remote librarians. And so that was one of the things, strategizing how to create a team of remote part-time librarians to assist with instruction. Also working to make all of our labs remotely available and to provide remote instruction and consultation through those labs. And really leveraging the technology that we have in the library, specifically our digital archive. During COVID and after hurricanes, Ida, we had a lot going on. So we really worked to digitize all of our collections as well as our artifacts. And we recently also did a migration to Alma, and as a companion product, we are using something called Leganto. And for those who aren't familiar, it's a reading list that can actually be embedded directly into the learning management system. And so because of all of the changes, those are, like I said, my roles changed, but we've really learned how to be much more user friendly because of those changes and the technology that we've used.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Siobahn.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I feel extremely honored to be here with you all. Although I'm not a librarian, I am a computer scientist and I'm into the technology. So I have the privilege of working at North Carolina Central University in the School of Library and Information Sciences. I have a master's in information science, and we have the only program, it's the only HBCU that has a master's of information science. So I'm very honored to be a part of not only HBCU, but a program that is the only one currently. And also, believe it or not, as an assistant professor, I'm also a minority at the HBCU. So if you're in the audience and you want to be a professor, please come. We need more diversity within the field. And it's not just at NCCU, it's everywhere. It needs more diversity. But what I was going to say as far as digital pedagogy, one thing that I enjoy about our program is it's a hybrid program. We definitely offer strictly online, but we offer if folks want to do hybrid or show up in person. And I have done a lot with our distance ed program in particular. And so just finding ways to bring the technology is here. And I like to work with my colleagues to let them know there's nothing to be afraid of. I was just in the lobby hearing the discussion that was being had. You know, there's no need to fear AI. That's actually my area of expertise. So I just want to say I love all the conversation that's being had. I'm honored to be here, and I look forward to learning from all these esteemed panelists and moderator today. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you so much. How have educators made use of pedagogical technologies through the library in your in their classes at your institution? And if so, do you have access to or examples of that interaction?
So I don't mind going first. So a few years ago, we got an IMLS grant specifically to help us integrate our labs into courses. And so the first way we did that was through our makerspace. And so we primarily work with our physics students, our computer science students. We have a lot of pre-med students, and also, so they would come in and make models for their anatomy and physiology classes. So that, and then we also have an X-Core, which is kind of our, it's required electives basically for students. And so we also use that to teach them how to be creative, and so they come into our lab and they make. The other way that we've really leveraged it is for our data visualization lab has really been heavily used by our doctoral students. And so when they're writing their dissertations, obviously those are important resources to them. And because our program is remote, which is the reason we made sure that the lab is remotely available. So even if you're not on campus, you can access all of the technology, as well as receive consultations and instruction and workshops from wherever you are. And so we do that with a swivel, if you're, with the iPad and the microphones, and they follow you around the room. So we've really been able to bring all of our remote students into our spaces and all of our remote folks into the library. So that's kind of the main ways in which we've integrated directly into courses.
For us at FISC, we collaborate quite often with our faculty, especially in data science and computer science. And so most recently, Dr. Owens, who was the dean of the library, partnered with our faculty on a project for incorporating VR into the classroom, and took VR into a history course and created simulations around different events in African-American history. And in the traditional way, as a library, we offer all of similar resources that Kayla mentioned, research guides, our online databases, as well as grad school test prep sessions, as well as practice sessions, as well as resources for studying, like guides and things like that. Right now, we're venturing into more of the data science, as we have a wonderful fellow here who just completed a huge hackathon event in the library. And that's our venture into what we've tried to do is create more of a space for data curation and data management, and trying to be the leaders on campus in the library for that initiative and helping our faculty with their research and their data, as well as our students who do a lot of research. And so, yeah, those are the ways that we're trying to incorporate this into classrooms. And again, through our information literacy and digital literacy instruction, we offer tools and tips for our students that are open access and free. As a small library, a small HBCU, obviously funds and resources are tight. So how can we still allow for our students to be competitive in the fields that they're going into by opening them up to free open access resources?
And I just want to share that my work is in the opposite direction, but to piggyback off my colleague DeLisa's points about really just using the resources that are available, what we wanted to do, and I'm also an LIS educator at the University of Maryland as an assistant professor, is to look at those ingredients that make HBCUs unique. I was really stretched by Loretta Parham's keynote this morning, and to see really and just advocate for what makes HBCUs unique. And then as a subset, what makes HBCU libraries so effective. And so I was able to edit a book in which one of the chapters, NCCU librarians actually came together and wrote about really how they make things work with very little resource allocation and cultural and professional understanding on the campus of the work of LIS. So one of the things that Loretta said this morning was the concept of a Black college goes beyond racial composition, and we are culture keepers. So within LIS education, I work closely with the Black caucus of the Library Alliance, BCALA. I always just use the acronym because I butcher it. So BCALA, working closely with them and creating a digital space akin to the HBCU campus experience. So what are those ingredients, again, that foster high self-efficacy and cultural pride? So what we did is we gleaned from Gassman and Arroyo's framework for HBCU student success and brought it to LIS education. And we know full well the disparity, but those markers, and I have them here, I'm happy to share, are bringing in a range of students using, this is relevant to this conversation, institutional accessibility and pedagogical innovation, and then identity formation, values cultivation, achievement. But then when a student graduates, we look at success holistically on HBCU campus. I was an HBCU librarian. My daughter is now at FAMU. So we know that we've always talked about the richness of the HBCU experience, but it's absent in LIS education, which is very whitewashed. So what we did is we created a virtual community, an online LIS program independent IMLS Black student group. So it needed to be divorced from LIS programs again, so that it's for us, by us. And so using all of the things that my colleagues said, all of the pedagogical tools, Slack, Canvas, creating our own curriculum, Google Classroom, and allowing LIS students who are Black to synergize across programs and have their own student group and not go through the bureaucracy of student services on a campus, all of that paperwork, the financing, needing a board. So I think that's relevant to digital pedagogy because we forget what's special about HBCUs and what whitewashed programs can learn from HBCU libraries themselves. So I just wanted to inject that point.
I love that point too. If I may, I like that culture keepers because we are, and who better to keep that culture than us, right? For us, by us. So I really do appreciate you saying that. And I just want to add a couple of things, piggybacking off of my colleagues. And when I talk, I'm speaking directly about my program. Again, I'm not a librarian, so I don't want to overstate something that I'm not sure of, but we do have all the guides, like DeLisa was saying, all of that, but I'm really touched by my previous colleague's statements about the culture keeper. One thing that is unfortunate that DeLisa touched on too is funding. And I can speak to the reason why that's such a problem is because a lot of times at HBCUs, people are wearing multiple hats. They don't have the capacity to do everything. And I'll give you an example just of myself. You know, a lot of times we have very high teaching loads. And if you do want to do research and apply for funding from IMLS and other organizations, that takes a lot of effort. And depending on what your teaching load is and other service responsibilities, right? Because we are the face a lot of times of our libraries or programs. A lot of people seek us out for our expertise. You just can't pour from an empty cup. And so that is one unfortunate thing. We do have the knowledge, we're capable, we're able, but sometimes everybody's just doing multiple things. And so that's the downside. I forgot the question, but I was so enjoying it. What was the question there, Dr. Turner? I forgot what the original question was.
It was, how have educators made use of pedagogical technologies via the libraries in their classes at your HBCU?
Yes. And again, I just want to piggyback everything that DeLisa was mentioning, the LibGuides. We're not that far as Kayla's institution is bringing the VR technology. I love that aspect, but we are using the technology that's available to us. As Anna mentioned as well, using learning management systems. We're using Slack. I bought that to my program. Now everybody's in the workspace chatting constantly, and my students can definitely get in touch with me probably a little bit too often. But we're using all those technologies, and it's great because at the end of the day, the technology is not separating us, but it's actually bringing us closer together. And that's the benefit that I see in us bringing technology into the classroom.
Okay, thank you all so much. And so the next question is, do you believe that your libraries have existing pedagogical technologies that may be underutilized in courses or classes? And if so, how might we increase their use?
This is a little bit more of a complicated question to me because my answer would be yes and no. There's a lot of things that we've done over the last few years, basically to adapt, right? There's things that we had to do because we have to keep the doors open, we have to keep our services going, we're rebuilding. And so, as an educational leadership researcher, I think, okay, so we have these tools that we've set up. We've created a remote team of librarians. They are dispersed across the US as well as international, which allows us to do instruction and also virtual chat around the clock. That's great. It filled the need, but at the same time, what we found was our faculty prefer in-person instruction. The students want to see a person. And so although we've taken the time to build this program, that does meet the need, it's not meeting the need in the way that the campus desires. And so how do you really negotiate with the fact that, okay, we have to rebuild the team, it takes time, but at the same time, you still need instruction, right? Also, when you have such a small staff, you have to innovate, right? So we said, okay, we're going to hire as many students as we can, and we're going to train them to run the operations, anything that they can do that we don't have to physically stand with them. So our students really took over a lot of the operations, which surprisingly was more effective than hiring remote folks. We didn't expect that. So what we learned was if we can really take our time to train our students in information literacy, teach them our tools, teach them the resources, they're creative enough to take that and reinterpret it to students in the way that they understand. And so that's been really successful. We also have these programs, like we have our data visualization lab. Yes, it's accessible remotely, but it's very difficult to promote, especially when you're not on campus, and it's difficult to get in front of the students. And so I think that one of the most common issues that we have is simply getting the word out to the students, helping them to understand what our resources are, what our services are, and why it matters to them. And ironically, when we get our student workers, they're a captive audience, so we can teach them everything, and they're blown away. They're like, why didn't I know about this? How come we haven't been doing this every day? We had an open house 2 years ago, and I believe we only had maybe 25 students. I started working with SGA. I said, look, we need to work with SGA to discuss directly what our initiatives are. And we started meeting every 2 weeks. And the next event we had so many students come that we had to move the venue. I think it was over 85 students showed up. So you can have the technology, you can have the plan, you can have the money, you can have the budget, but if you don't have the buy-in of the students, of the faculty, of the administration, of your marketing department, it almost doesn't matter what you have. And so that's been one of the biggest issues. And again, I mentioned Leganto earlier, which I think is a really great resource, because not only are you able to pull resources directly from the library's catalog, but you can embed it directly into their Brightspace. It provides analytics for the professor. But my secret undercover real reason for wanting to do it is because it makes the professors give us their syllabi. And so if you give me your syllabus, I can create custom instruction for you. I can make sure that the books that you need for class are actually purchased in time. I can get the journal articles you need. So it's buy-in and it's promotion. And so learning how to really get into the right ear at the right time. I mean, I'm not above going to faculty association meetings and saying, hey, by the way, let me show you this slide from our, so I think that we just have to be really, really creative these days, because no one really has a lot of time. I can send 1,000 emails. It doesn't mean you're going to reply. I've sent emails where faculty have said, this is a great resource, thanks for telling me, and I never hear from them again. So really, it's the promotion and it's the buy-in.
Yeah, Kayla said just about everything that I would echo everything. You know, for us, we're moving into Leganto, so we have Alma Primo, and that has changed a lot of how we do our library work and automating a lot of our processes, which has helped us to improve our instruction and improve the connection we can have with faculty and staff and students. But we've got a long ways to go. And I think marketing is a big part of this. Kayla mentioned that. And that's what I'm figuring out as an advocate for this library, is that you have to get the word out and figuring out those ways. And we tried to amp up social media. We've tried to market with different campaigns. And so I would shout out a library that I always look at and follow on Twitter is AUC Woodruff Library, who does amazing work with marketing their instruction, their programs, and their events. And, you know, so it's possible. And, you know, just thinking about what Dr. Grady was discussing with, we all wear a lot of hats here. And so our faculty, we have dedicated faculty who always use the library, we always talk to, and they're always interested in what we're doing. And then we have a good majority of our faculty who aren't, you know, maybe don't have the time to engage or haven't thought about coming over to the library. And so, you know, just working around those barriers and trying to remove them has been a challenge, but something that we're up for, and our staff is excited for. All of our staff love our students, and we work with our students every day. And so our mission is just to try to make things happen as best we can and use our skills and talents to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. If we don't have any more responses to that question, I'll go ahead and move on to the next one. How are educators and students making use of primary sources in classroom instruction or assignments? How are you noticing that coming through your various departments?
Yeah, we, as I mentioned before, we hosted a hackathon here, and one of the ways we were approached by the data scientists to, if they could use the archives data to incorporate in their courses. And I, you know, this is the first time this is happening, so I was intrigued and excited to partner and collaborate on that effort. You know, prior to that, our archives are, you know, not to brag, one of the greatest archives around here at Fisk. We have so many wonderful collections, and we definitely have been successful with getting classrooms and students into our special collections reading room. Even if it's just looking at the yearbooks, they get excited for seeing Fisk and the greatness of the past and everything that was, the organizations and the Greek life and all of that, and incorporating that into their work. We've partnered with faculty on a number of exhibits where students curated archival materials, as well as wrote essays about the materials that they chose from the archives. And so, yeah, those are just some of the ways we work with faculty and students through our archives. We also have a major initiative now, a 4-year grant to digitize the entire Rosenwald collection here. And we've hired 2 graduate assistants who are doing metadata on the project, and about 6 undergraduate students who are doing digitization, scanning, and they're every time I see one of the students that's working on that project, they're excited about what they're seeing and the work that they're doing, and they're proud of the work that they're doing, and they're learning so much about archives, and just opening up their minds to a different world they probably never thought about or even knew about or understood. And so, yeah, I don't wanna.
And I'll just quickly add that although I'm not in the HBCU library space, I think there's some connections because oddly enough, there's a Rosenwald School and Museum, one of the oldest ones, around the corner from my home, right outside of DC in Prince George's County, Maryland. And they partnered with our university archives, and we're not an HBCU, but our university archivist is so dope. Her name is Lael Hughes Watkins. And so she runs a project 1856, about the history of slavery on this campus as part of a consortium. So shout out to her. And one of the things that they've done really well is to partner the university with local African-American history, which there's an abundance of in Maryland. We have 4 HBCUs and then 2 others in DC. And then there's so much African-American heritage in the state that needs to be digitized. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Thurgood Marshall. So we get a lot of interest in African-American archival practice at our university. One of the things that we've been discussing, which might be relevant to this conversation, is creating a self-paced mini course on what an archive actually is, where students can matriculate through it, the library resources, and just breaking down what is a finding aid. That might be new knowledge for a lot of people, even though it's working knowledge for us in the field. And then those students who majored in the humanities may see this as a viable option. So it's a recruitment tool, but also ready to use prepackaged curriculum that we hand to the faculty, that it's actually self-graded too, because there's quizzes throughout. And so this self-paced mini course model then can have a shadowing experience. This came from another context, which is working with Reforma and trying, so I have to credit Reforma, because through another grant, we try to see immigrants not just as high need and needy, basically the remedial narrative around immigrants, instead seeing immigrants as potential colleagues in LIS. So Reforma and a few groups came together to create a self-paced mini course to attract highly skilled immigrants. So we were like, this is so applicable to creating a pathway, but then also getting more students in the library and in the archive at the HBCU. By saying, faculty, you literally don't have to do anything. You have one job. Just include this in your history class. This is a prepackaged thing. And then there could be a shadowing experience where the students come in. So that's digital pedagogy. It follows in the continuum of pandemic education, where students were learning virtually on their own So that might be a way to have like evergreen material that the faculty can like easily employ. And then it just creates so many different benefit streams, like recruitment to the profession. But so I thought that, and again, crediting other people, Lael and Reforma, that we have so many different practices that we can, lend one another in our field. We are a sharing field.
And I had one last thing I wanted to add, and this is a shameless plug, especially if you're interested in archives. During the pandemic, so I'm in the School of Library and Information Sciences, and while most programs are LIS, ours is split. So you can either, major in library science or you can major in information science. And for our library science program, previously they were working with the history department to do some of that archives, but during the pandemic, we actually created a concentration specifically for archives and records management. So now our students get an opportunity to do that work. And we definitely have partnerships with our library where sometimes, and even BCLA, where they can actually work on projects to get some of that hands-on experience. And so I'll put a link in the chat if that's something you're interested in, but that's some of the ways in which that's happening at our institution.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip to the last question I prepared. What does HBCU library practice teach higher education broadly, or in what ways does higher education benefit from HBCU library practices?
So I think one of the things that makes HBCUs unique is our mission. And I know at Xavier, our mission is focused on social justice through empowering students to be leaders. And that's something that we take really seriously at our library. Like I said, our library is student run and student driven. They create the initiatives, they write proposals, they create budgets, and we say, here you go. And they're very creative. And the work that we've done with them and the trainings we provided have really made a difference in their trajectory. They're off to internships, they're getting scholarships, they're off to grad school. And so I think that I can't say that other schools don't do it or outside of HBCUs, that would probably be unfair to say. But I know that at Xavier, our focus is genuinely on empowering students and recognizing that they are the leaders of tomorrow. And it's our job to prepare them to take those roles. And I think that I think it's important to focus on the actual nurturing of the full person. And I think that's something that we do well at HBCUs.
Yeah, I think, when I think about our HBCUs and mine in particular, this is a family sort of environment. We're a small HBCU, but everyone here is connected in a way that we want each other to succeed and to be the best and to do well. And, across the board, my colleagues and our library staff and librarians, we want the same thing. And that's for our students to be successful, all of our students, not just a few, not just a small number, but all of our students, and to have what they need to be able to do that, to execute that, to realize their full dreams and beyond our doors, when they walk out into this world, that they're confident, that they're know that they're supported and they're able to do whatever they want or desire to do in their lives.
And for me, this is a little bit of a pain point, because when you ask what is like the value and the beauty of HBCU educational practices, I always think what could have been, because at the height, we spoke earlier, I think about accreditation. I know Loretta Parham was a chair of ALA accreditation at one point, but in our field, accreditation has been substantially weaponized, and the accreditation process in ALA is draconian. And so I'm happy to say that publicly. And I think that HBCU library programs were iced out. We wrote about that thanks to the DLF Futures Fellowship, and the archival data, it speaks for itself. And so what could have been? What would our numbers would been like? What would our professional identity been like? You know, we had Hampton, of course, but there's other programs people don't know about who are doing remarkable things for their time. In the 1970s, Alabama A&M, they were distributing crack cocaine awareness and tools and resources. And now we're talking about that in libraries and, you know, overdose prevention. And so and we also had the University of the District of Columbia. We had others, and they never made it past the accreditation hurdle. And we know that with Clark Atlanta, someone asked, was this documented and written about? It has been. And I just want to make an appeal that maybe we can compile and crowdsource all of the literature on HBCUs and let it live at maybe the DLF Authenticity Project website or maybe the HBCU Library Alliance website, because those stories need to be told. And I think that what would have been, and I was speaking to Kimberly Black, who is a faculty at Chicago State, which is a PBI, predominantly Black, not HBCU. So it took them 30 years to get accreditation, and they just have provisional. And so what would have been, and I think the value of the HBCU experience to LIS is it needs to be recorded more. And also, there needs to be documentation of what exactly happened to strategically ice out whole campuses. So I always think of that question like, you know, what's the beauty of HBCUs? And it's not to romanticize that we have different capacities, but I think that Black centered or even just POC or other centered education is vital for a profession that is, unlike a lot of professions, is very monocultural. And so we can, you know, discuss this all day, but I think we all know this and we're preaching to the choir, but we need to tell that story a little bit more. We brought a lot to LIS and Columbia, the first program. There's a lot written. W.E.B. Du Bois and others were like, why aren't you letting Langston Hughes into your program? They did not survive, but the Schomburg did, right? That program folded, but look at the legacy of the Schomburg. So our practices need to be shared also, and then our stories need to be shared.
I agree with all of what my panelists have said. You know, I'm a 3-time HBCU graduate, and let me tell you, O'Kelly Library, that's at Winston-Salem State University. Dr. Wanda Brown, she was president of ALA, to Bluford Library at A&T, to Shepherd Library, where I am now. I wouldn't be the researcher that I am today had those librarians not poured into me, showed me how to do a mean literature review and find all the information that I need. So I just want to piggyback off of everything that was said and just say that I believe HBCUs not only empower, but they nurture and love their students and give them a voice and know that what they have to say is important and should be heard. And that's a beautiful thing. And so I want to see that continue to happen. And to the previous panelist point, yeah, I do agree with that as well. You know, why are these programs not, why is NCCU the only HBCU with this program? You know, that's something that should be further looked at, and also sharing that story so history doesn't continue to repeat itself. And so all of it is equally important. And yeah, I look forward to seeing things change in the future, that people can understand the HBCU practices of the librarians, and the future will be perpetual and not, I like that terminology, iced out in the future.
Thank you all so much. We're moving to the question and answer portion, and we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. The first one is, I am hearing a lot about students succeeding, doing well, and leading. What ways can prospective employees reach out to these students, new information professionals, and library staff know about employment opportunities? We have ALA Spectrum, SAA, and ARL Kaleidoscope spheres, but it's not enough to get the word out about roles that will support these endangered collections. Thank you.
I'll be really brief. I think that is a great question. It is, I think, especially in our field, it's extraordinarily difficult to market well. But I think that organizations like the HBCU Library Alliance is a really good resource. I think that could be leveraged more. But you're right. I mean, I think that we need to come together as a working group and figure that one out.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, you know, ALA, SAA, ARL, God bless them all. But, you know, these roles or positions at HBCUs are often not, you can't afford to post them on ALA or SAA or wherever those job boards are, if that's the question I'm hearing. And so often, you know, looking at social media for the different libraries, maybe, I know there's a great space called We Here, where it's a safe space where some opportunities definitely come across. And I think it's outside of the box kind of sort of thing. We have to move away from the traditional places where, because honestly, you know, it's just not gonna be there. So, you know, I guess I really don't have an answer, but just saying, think outside the box and look in places that you may not expect. LinkedIn has become a great place to find opportunities that maybe aren't at larger institutions or for new professionals. So yeah.
Okay, we have one additional question, or two. Certain well-known institutions often expect their students and users to know all their library resources already. I've had graduate students not know that we had subject librarians. I didn't know certain libraries were libraries due to the physical space not looking like a traditional library space. Without lectures and professors using and introducing our resources to students and library directors not caring, is there anything librarians and library staff can do to push our resources out? So this goes back to that same sort of outreach marketing question we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I would say for librarians and library staff who are feeling like, you know, people don't know about us, or that, you know, our space maybe doesn't look like a library, feel like a library. Again, thinking outside of the traditional boxes, you know, a library, what is a library? Okay, how do you define it? And getting away from the traditional and thinking, okay, what are the basic ways in which I know what a library is and how I can communicate that when I'm going to lunch with colleagues, or if I'm walking around campus, or if I stop by somebody's office. Am I talking up the library, or like, hey, I was just playing around with this new database? Like, sometimes the ways in which we have to get the word out require us to remove ourselves from traditional and just thinking outside of the box in everyday conversation. Or, you know, am I posting about things, or am I discussing it with other people? Is there that one faculty member I always talk to, or I make eye contact with, that comes in our building? You know, can I stop them and say, hey, you know, what classes are you teaching? Or just engaging outside of that traditional box and space.
And I was gonna just add that what I hear in that question is that there's first generation grad students, and some people may not at all know what a subject librarian is. Writing to a genre that is totally different, Chicago to ALA and APA rather, and so there might just need to be like, are you a first-time grad student? Like, because we have a lot of first-time grad students, and those who are from marginal or marginalized communities are more likely to be first-gen grad students. So there's entire side curriculum, side education that we may need to be making explicit. So like the implied explicit. So what I heard in that question is that there's people who just may not know the culture of grad school, or you know, having a subject expert as, you know, a librarian, that's a thing. So that might be something that we could, like, I guess, make plain to our members and library patrons.
And we have one last question. I think this will have to be the last one. Lauren is asking for some thoughts on whether what she's presenting, it makes any sense. Do you think it would be helpful? My major question to ALA is why are they not trying to establish more LIS programs at HBCUs if they're wanting more diversity in the profession? It makes more sense to me to establish programs at HBCUs so that more BIPOC people will have opportunity to enter the library profession. And she's kind of wanting to know, does this make sense? Does this seem helpful to you all?
If I may jump in here, that's my other obsession provocation, which is not just what could have been, but what could be. And so there's a lot of models out there. I champion that. I can't tell you how excited I am to see that question. And then, by the way, I've worked very closely with Dr. Aisha Johnson, and John Gant as well. So we actually were supposed to have something at NCCU. The pandemic happened, long story, but there's a lot of synergy between Hampton, NCCU, and the Black Caucus of ALA. So what I believe could happen, there's two ways where there's a lot of LIS programs that are literally across the street from HBCUs. You can have a 4+1 where you do some of your education at the HBCU and then it counts toward your LIS. But the fact that it's so expensive to get ALA accreditation, even at the provisional level, is a barrier. So we cannot leave it to ALA. Your question was, why doesn't ALA do something? Cannot be left to ALA. It's going to have to be LIS programs. And so, HBCU creating programs, not ALA. So 4+1 is one model, and I believe University of South Carolina has a wonderful 4+1. We have a 4+1, and we're hoping to collaborate with Bowie State, also supporting NCCU and sending students to NCCU whenever we have African-American hopefuls and emerging librarians. I always elevate Chicago State and NCCU, although I work at Maryland, University of Maryland. So I think there's a lot of potential. There could be one HBCU that is accredited, and then we have many different sites, like you have universities and you have other sites. So NCCU can have a site at Fisk. So we've explored this, tossed it around. And again, I'm very excited by that question, but I won't belabor the point. I'll be here all day to talk about this topic.
Okay, thank you all so much. I want to thank Drs. Grady, Ndumu, Harris, and Siddell. I also want to thank the audience for participating in this discussion. And that is our time.